Get him out of here before he scratches something expensive. Blake Harrington said it loud enough for the whole showroom to hear, and that was exactly the point. The words slid across the polished marble floor of Whitmore Luxe like a dropped glass, sharp, clean, and meant to cut. Ethan Walker stood near the entrance with one hand wrapped around his daughter's small fingers and the other holding a worn envelope filled with old service papers. His jacket was faded at the elbows. His boots carried a little dust from the parking lot. A faint line of grease still rested beneath one thumbnail, the kind that does not wash away easily when a man has spent years fixing things other people were too proud to understand. Beside him, 8-year-old Lily looked up at the ceiling lights, then at the silver cars lined beneath them like museum pieces. She had never seen a place so bright, so quiet, so cold. Every surface seemed to shine. The leather seats smelled new. The glass walls reflected everything, including the way the customers turned to stare. "Sir," Ethan said calmly, "I only need to speak with someone about a central control module for an older Aurora." Blake laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because men like him often mistook cruelty for confidence. "An Aurora?" he said. "You mean the vehicle line that starts above what most people make in 5 years?" A couple near the coffee bar glanced over. One man lowered his espresso cup. Lily's grip tightened around her father's hand. Ethan felt it, and his jaw shifted just slightly. Not anger, not pride, only the quiet work of keeping a child safe from someone else's ugliness. "I brought the part number," Ethan said, lifting the envelope. "It should be in your archive inventory." "Our archive inventory is not open to walk-ins," Blake replied. "And this dealership is not a free field trip." Lily's cheeks turned pink. She looked down at her sneakers, clean but old, with one white lace that had been tied twice where it had snapped. Ethan lowered his voice. "She is a child." Blake leaned closer, smiling with all his teeth and none of his heart. "And this is a luxury dealership." For a moment, the showroom went still. The soft music overhead kept playing, some piano melody too delicate for the room it was trapped inside. Outside, beyond the glass, the late afternoon sky had turned the color of wet steel. A light rain tapped against the windows, gentle at first, then steadier, as if the world itself was trying to speak but had not yet found the courage. Ethan knelt slowly, not to beg, not to explain, but to pick up Lily's little butterfly hair clip that had slipped from her pocket onto the marble. He brushed it with his thumb, placed it back in her hand, and gave her the kind of smile fathers give when they are carrying more than they can say. "Did we do something wrong, Daddy?" she whispered. Ethan looked at her, and the pain in his eyes softened before it could reach his voice. "No, sweetheart. Some people forget respect when the lights are too bright. That should have ended it." But Blake snapped his fingers toward the security desk. "Mason, call someone. I want him out." A young salesman near the reception counter hesitated. His name tag read Mason Reed, and he had been watching Ethan since the moment he walked in. There was something in the way Ethan studied the framed engineering sketch on the wall, something too precise to belong to a man who was only pretending to know cars. Earlier, when Blake had turned away, Mason had seen Ethan take a pencil from the counter and quietly correct a tiny labeling error in the diagram of the Aurora's drive system. Not a guess, not a show-off move. A correction made by someone who knew the machine from the inside. But Mason said nothing. Fear is a small room, and he was still learning how to step out of it. Ethan did not argue when the security guard approached. He did not raise his voice. He simply folded the envelope, slipped it inside his jacket, and guided Lily toward the doors. Behind them, Blake muttered. "Probably came in from some junkyard hoping to feel important." The words landed, and this time Ethan stopped. Not fully, just enough for the room to notice. Then he kept walking. The automatic doors opened with a soft breath, and the rain met them outside. Ethan lifted Lily into his old silver coupe parked at the far edge of the lot, a car with no badge on the hood and years of road dust along the lower panels. Blake watched through the glass, smirking, until Ethan turned the key. The engine woke with a low, clean sound unlike anything on the showroom floor. Across the lot, a black company sedan had just pulled in. Claire Whitmore, chief executive officer of Whitmore Motors, stepped out beneath a dark umbrella, heard that sound, and froze. Claire Whitmore did not move for 3 full seconds. The umbrella in her hand tilted slightly, letting rain spot the shoulder of her navy coat, but she did not seem to feel it. Her eyes were fixed on the old silver coupe idling at the edge of the lot, on the soft vibration of its frame, on the deep, even note rolling from beneath the hood like a memory she had been told was dead. "Ms. Whitmore," her assistant asked from behind her. "Is everything all right?" Claire lifted one hand, quieting him without looking away. That sound was impossible. The Aurora line had become the jewel of Whitmore Motors, the one vehicle that had pulled the company through its worst decade. But the original prototype had vanished long before Claire became chief executive officer. Her father used to speak of it only after midnight, when grief loosened the lock on his voice. He called it the first heartbeat. He said it had been lost in a failed road test, buried under legal reports, insurance claims, and silence. Yet here it was, sitting under a gray California rain, carrying a little girl in the passenger seat and a man in a faded jacket behind the wheel. Inside the car, Lily wiped a circle in the fogged window with her sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, "why was that man so mean?" Ethan kept both hands on the steering wheel. The dashboard glowed faintly, not bright like modern luxury screens, but warm, amber, almost handmade. "Some people measure a person by what they can see," he said. "A coat, a pair of boots, a bank account." Lily looked at him. "But that is not how Mom measured people." Ethan's throat tightened. Grace had been gone nearly 4 years, but there were moments when her name still changed the temperature of the air. He glanced at the small photograph. Tucked near the center console, a picture of Grace Walker laughing beside this very car, her hair caught by the desert wind during a test drive outside Bakersfield. Back then, the Aurora had not been a product. It had been a promise. A safer engine, a smarter control system, a machine built to protect families, not impress strangers. "No," Ethan said softly. "Your mom measured people by what they carried quietly." Lily rested her hand against the worn leather seat. "Is that why we keep fixing her car?" Ethan smiled, but it did not reach all the way to his eyes. "We keep fixing it because I made her a promise." The rain thickened over the windshield. The wipers swept back and forth with a tired rhythm. Ethan reached into his jacket and touched the folded envelope. Inside were part numbers, handwritten notes, and a faded letter from Grace, the last one she had left in the glove compartment before the hospital took more from her than medicine could give back. The central control module had been failing for weeks. Without it, the Aurora would not survive another winter. Ethan could rebuild almost anything, but this part had been made in one limited run and locked away in Whitmore's old inventory system. That was why he had come. Not for attention, not for revenge, not even for an apology. He had come because Lily was nearly 9 now, old enough to ask about her mother without crying every time, old enough to someday understand that this car was more than metal. It was where Grace had sung to her before she was born. It was where Ethan had driven through the night to get her to the doctor when the storms flooded Highway 99. It was the last place their family had felt whole. Behind the glass doors, Blake was still smiling, proud of the little humiliation he had performed. Mason Reed stood beside the reception desk, unable to shake what he had seen on the engineering sketch. Then Claire Whitmore crossed the parking lot, her heels clicking against wet pavement, each step faster than the last. Ethan shifted the car into reverse, ready to leave with his dignity intact, when Claire raised her hand in front of the hood. Not like an executive stopping a stranger. Like a daughter recognizing a ghost. Ethan eased his foot onto the brake. Claire stared through the rain at the car, then at him. Her voice came out almost breathless. "Please," she said, "do not turn that engine off." For a moment, Ethan did not answer. Rain streamed down the windshield in silver lines, bending Claire Whitmore's reflection across the glass until she looked less like the woman from the business magazines and more like someone standing at the edge of a memory she was afraid to touch. Lily leaned toward her father and whispered, "Daddy, who is she?" Ethan kept his eyes on Claire. "Someone who knows this car," he said quietly. Claire stepped closer to the driver's side window, her umbrella trembling slightly in her hand. "Where did you get it?" she asked. The question was simple, but the tone beneath it was not. It carried years of boardroom rumors, sealed reports, and the kind of family grief that money can decorate but never heal. Ethan lowered the window halfway. Cool rain-scented air slipped into the car. "I did not get it," he said. "It was my wife's." Claire blinked. "Your wife?" Ethan nodded once. "Grace Walker." The name moved through Claire like a door opening in an abandoned house. Her face changed so quickly that even Lily noticed. The sharp confidence in her eyes softened into disbelief. Grace Walker. Claire had heard that name only a handful of times as a child, always in fragments, always when adults thought she was not listening. Grace, the test engineer who had stayed late. Grace, the woman who had pulled records from a damaged system before the servers went dark. Grace, the one her father once called brave, then never spoke of again. Behind Claire, the showroom doors slid open, and Blake Harrington hurried out with Mason Reed close behind him. "Ms. Whitmore," Blake called, forcing a polished laugh into the rain. "I am so sorry. We were just handling a minor situation with a walk-in who refused to follow dealership policy." Ethan looked down at Lily. "Stay in the car, sweetheart." "Did I do something bad?" she asked. He turned to her fully then, taking the extra second a good father always finds even when the world is pressing hard on his shoulders. "No. You listened. You were kind. That is never bad." Lily nodded, but her eyes were wet. Ethan opened the door and stepped out into the rain. He did not slam it. He did not square his shoulders like a man preparing for a fight. He simply stood beside the old Aurora with quiet dignity, his boots darkening against the wet pavement, his faded jacket gathering water at the seams. Blake looked him over again, this time with irritation sharpened by embarrassment. "Sir, you need to leave the property. This area is for clients and scheduled executive visits." Claire did not look at Blake. "What did you say to his daughter?" Blake's smile twitched. "Excuse me." "Inside," Claire said. Her voice was low, but every word landed with weight. "What did you say to the child?" Mason swallowed. Blake glanced toward the glass doors, where several employees and customers had gathered to watch. "Nothing inappropriate. I simply explained that this is a luxury environment and that certain standards have to be maintained." Ethan wiped rain from his brow with the back of his hand. He told her I could not afford the cleaning bill. The silence after that was small, but complete. Even the rain seemed to soften around it. Claire turned her eyes to Blake, and for the first time since he had known her, he looked unsure of where to place his hands. "You said that to an 8-year-old girl?" she asked. "Ms. Whitmore, with respect, people come in all the time pretending to be buyers. They take pictures. They touch the cars. They waste staff time. I was protecting the brand." Claire's expression tightened. "No, Blake. You were protecting your ego and calling it the brand." Mason lowered his gaze, shame passing across his face. Ethan did not smile. He did not enjoy seeing another man corrected. That was not who he was. But he looked through the window at Lily, sitting very still with Grace's photograph beside her, and something old moved behind his eyes. Not anger. Not revenge. A father's ache. Claire slowly walked to the front of the Aurora. "Open the hood," she said. Blake gave a nervous laugh. "Ms. Whitmore, I would not recommend touching that vehicle. It is clearly modified, and we cannot verify safety or ownership." Ethan looked at Claire. She looked back at him, and neither of them blinked. "Please," she said again, but this time her voice was not a command. It was almost a plea. Ethan reached inside the car, pulled the release, and lifted the hood. The engine bay opened beneath the gray sky, clean, hand-built, impossible. Claire stared at the brushed metal housing near the control core, then reached toward a small engraved line almost hidden beneath the rain. Her breath caught when she read it. "For Grace, so she can always find her way home. E.W." Blake's face lost its color. Mason took one step closer. Claire looked up at Ethan as if the whole past had just spoken through the machine. "E.W.," she whispered. "Ethan Walker." The sound of Claire saying his name traveled farther than it should have. It passed Blake's frozen smile, Mason's lowered eyes, the glass doors, the watching customers, and the polished showroom beyond them. Ethan Walker stood in the rain beside the open hood, and for the first time that afternoon, no one looked at his boots. They looked at his hands. Worn hands. Steady hands. The kind that had built something the company itself had spent 10 years pretending was gone. Claire touched the engraved line with 2 fingers, careful as if the metal might bruise. "My father told me the first Aurora was destroyed," she said. Ethan's face did not change. "A lot of things were destroyed back then," he answered. Blake quickly stepped forward. "Ms. Whitmore, I really think we should take this conversation inside. This man could be making claims based on old rumors. We do not know what we are looking at." Claire turned just enough to stop him. "I know exactly what I am looking at." The words were quiet, but they struck harder than shouting. Blake closed his mouth. Mason stared at the engine bay, his mind racing through every training video, every corporate history packet, every carefully edited paragraph about the Aurora program. None of them had mentioned Ethan Walker. None of them had mentioned Grace. None of them had mentioned that the missing prototype might still be alive, breathing softly under California rain. Lily opened the passenger door a few inches. Daddy. Ethan looked back immediately. It is all right, sweetheart. Is Mommy's car in trouble? That question did what Blake's cruelty had not. It reached him. Ethan lowered his eyes, then walked to the door and crouched beside her. Rain ran down the back of his jacket, but he spoke like they were alone in their kitchen at home. No, Mommy's car is just telling the truth. Lily nodded slowly, trying to understand the kind of truth adults hide inside metal and silence. Claire watched them, and something in her expression shifted from curiosity to shame. She had spent years defending a legacy built on polished speeches, awards, and shareholder confidence. But standing there beside a father and his daughter, she felt the first crack in the marble. Mr. Walker, she said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. Ethan stood again. That is all I brought with me. Claire glanced once at the control core. Were you part of the original Aurora design team? Blake let out a short, nervous breath, almost a laugh. Ethan did not look at him. I led the integration team for the adaptive drive system. Mason's head lifted. Claire went still. That system became the foundation for every Whitmore hybrid platform after 2016. Ethan nodded. With changes. Your name is not on any patent list I have seen. No, Ethan said. It would not be. Blake seized the opening. There, you see? That is exactly what I mean. Anyone can say they built something. The records matter. Ethan finally turned his eyes to Blake, calm and tired. Records can be edited. The rain tapped harder against the hood. Somewhere inside the showroom, a customer whispered, and the whisper died as quickly as it began. Claire felt her pulse in her throat. Her father's last year had been full of half-finished confessions. He had once held her hand in a hospital room and said, If you ever hear the name Walker, do not let the lawyers speak first. She had thought grief made people poetic. Now she wondered if it had made him honest. Why did you leave? Claire asked. Ethan breathed in slowly. The smell of wet pavement, warm engine metal, and leather drifted between them. Because after the Desert Ridge test, the report said I ignored a thermal warning. It said my system failed. It said Grace backed the finding. His voice stayed even, but something beneath it trembled. Grace never backed it. She found the original data. Then the servers went down, the files disappeared, and the company needed someone small enough to blame. Claire swallowed. And you let them? Ethan looked through the rain at Lily, who held her mother's photograph in both hands. I had a wife recovering from injuries, a baby on the way, and a lawyer who told me fighting Whitmore would take everything I had left. So I chose my family. Blake folded his arms, but the gesture looked weaker now. Convenient story. Claire ignored him. If Grace had the data, where is it? Ethan reached into the engine bay and rested his hand on the sealed module near the firewall. She hid it where only someone who loved the car enough to keep it running would ever find it. Mason whispered before he could stop himself, the central control module. Ethan looked at him and gave one small nod. Claire stared at the failing part Ethan had come to replace, and the truth settled over the lot with the weight of thunder. He had not come to buy luxury. He had come carrying the evidence that could rewrite Whitmore's history. Claire did not ask another question in the rain. She simply looked at Ethan, then at the control module, then at the little girl holding a photograph in the passenger seat, and made a decision that would cost more than money. Bring the vehicle into Service Bay 1, she said. Blake's head snapped toward her. Ms. Whitmore, absolutely not. That bay is prepared for tomorrow's press inspection. Claire closed the hood with care, not force. Then tomorrow's press inspection can wait. But the investors are already nervous about the Aurora launch. Then they should be grateful, Claire said, her voice steady. Because the truth has arrived before the cameras. Blake had no answer for that. A minute later, the glass service doors rose with a mechanical hum, and Ethan guided the old silver coupe inside. The sound of its engine filled the tiled bay, low and warm, while technicians stepped away from their spotless workstations and stared as if an old photograph had suddenly started breathing. Lily climbed out slowly, clutching Grace's picture against her chest. Ethan removed his jacket and placed it around her shoulders, even though he was the one soaked from the rain. Mason noticed. Claire noticed. Even one of the older mechanics near the lift pressed his lips together, because men who work with their hands recognize the quiet sacrifices of other men before anyone says a word. Blake followed them in with his phone already in his hand, whispering to someone from corporate legal, but Claire raised one finger. No outside calls. Not yet. You cannot block me from reporting a liability. I can block you from burying evidence before I see it. The service bay went still. Ethan looked at her then, not with gratitude exactly, but with a careful kind of respect. He had heard powerful people say noble things before. He had also watched them disappear when the paperwork got difficult. Claire walked to a diagnostic station and turned to Mason. Pull up the archive interface for pre-production Aurora systems. Mason hesitated. I do not have clearance for that. Use mine. Blake stepped in sharply. Ms. Whitmore, this is extremely irregular. Claire did not look away from the screen. So is finding a dead prototype in my parking lot. Ethan stood beside the open driver's door while Mason connected the scanner beneath the dash. The cable clicked into place. The monitor flickered. For several seconds, nothing happened except the soft ticking of the engine cooling and the rain tapping against the service bay windows. Lily stood close to her father's leg. Is Mommy in there? She whispered. Ethan crouched beside her, brushing a damp curl from her forehead. Not like that, sweetheart. He touched the side of the console. But sometimes people leave love in the things they protect. The screen suddenly flashed amber. Mason leaned forward. There is a locked partition. Claire's breath caught. Can you open it? Mason typed quickly, then shook his head. It wants a phrase key. Old format. Not corporate encryption. Blake gave a relieved laugh. Well, there it is. We are wasting time. Ethan did not move. His eyes were on the prompt. 12 blank spaces glowed in a row. He had not seen that interface in 10 years, but grief has a strange memory. It forgets birthdays sometimes. It forgets where keys were placed. But it remembers the exact words spoken by a dying woman when she asks you not to let the truth disappear. Claire turned to him. Do you know it? Ethan swallowed. He looked at Lily. Your mother used to say something whenever the car would not start. Lily nodded faintly. Find your way home. Ethan typed the words slowly. FINDYOURWAYHOME. The system paused. The service bay held its breath. Then the screen opened. Files began to populate one after another. Thermal logs, road telemetry, voice notes, incident timing, engineer signatures. Mason whispered, Oh my goodness. Claire leaned in, her face paling as the original Desert Ridge test data filled the monitor. The warning Ethan had supposedly ignored had never reached his console. The failure had begun in a supplier component approved above his level. Then a second file opened, and Grace Walker's voice emerged from the speakers, soft, strained, unmistakably calm. If anyone finds this, Ethan did not fail the Aurora. He saved us. Someone changed the report. Blake took one step back. No one told him to be silent. He simply became silent. Grace Walker's voice filled the service bay, and no one moved. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The recording carried the fragile steadiness of someone who had been hurt, someone who knew time was no longer something she could spend freely, yet still chose truth over comfort. The warning delay started before Ethan took manual control, Grace said through the speakers. He redirected power to the safety cage. He kept the cabin from catching fire. He saved 3 engineers, including me. The official report is wrong. The audio crackled, then continued with a soft breath. If this file is erased from the servers, this module will hold the original sequence. Lily looked up at Ethan. That is Mommy. Ethan nodded once, but he could not speak. He had heard Grace's voice. In memory, in dreams, in the quiet places of the house where grief sits down without asking. But hearing it here, under the white service lights, in front of strangers who had laughed at his daughter, felt like the past had walked back through a locked door carrying proof in both hands. Claire covered her mouth. Mason stopped typing. One of the older mechanics removed his cap. Blake stood near the tool cabinet, pale, stiff, suddenly smaller than the suit he wore. Pause it, Claire whispered. Mason tapped the key. The speakers fell silent, but the silence that followed was heavier than sound. Claire turned to Blake. You said he was wasting staff time. Blake tried to recover the shape of authority. Ms. Whitmore, I had no way of knowing what was in that vehicle. Ethan's voice came low from beside the car. You did not need to know what was in the vehicle to show respect to a child. Blake opened his mouth, then closed it. There are moments when truth does not argue. It simply stands there until pride runs out of places to hide. Claire looked back at the monitor. Mason, show me the signature trail. Mason's hands moved quickly now, guided by something stronger than fear. Windows opened across the screen. Approval codes. Timestamps. Internal routing. The official report had been changed 36 hours after the Desert Ridge incident. Ethan's original system logs were marked corrupted. Grace's safety notes were removed. A senior authorization code had replaced the findings with a clean narrative that made one man small enough to sacrifice. Mason leaned closer. This authorization belongs to Harrington Capital Holdings. The name struck the room like a gavel. Claire slowly turned. Blake's face tightened. Harrington Capital was not just an investor. It was one of the private firms that had carried Whitmore Motors through the Aurora crisis. It was also Blake's family. That does not prove anything about me, Blake said quickly. I was in college when that happened. Ethan looked at him, and there was no hatred in his eyes. Somehow, that made it worse. No one said it proved you changed the report. Claire stepped closer to Blake. But it explains why you recognized the name Walker before I said it. Blake's jaw worked once. Mason looked up sharply, remembering the way Blake had reacted in the rain. Not confused, not curious, but afraid. Claire's voice sharpened. Did you know who he was? Blake shook his head too fast. No. Did your father ever mention Ethan Walker? No. Did you know the original Aurora prototype was not destroyed? Blake looked toward the open service doors, toward the rain, toward any escape that did not require an answer. He found none. Lily slipped her hand into Ethan's. Her small fingers were warm. Ethan squeezed them gently, not to comfort himself, but to remind her that truth should never make a person cruel. Claire turned back to the screen. Resumed the recording. Mason pressed play. Grace's voice returned, weaker now, but clear. Ethan wanted to fight this. I asked him not to. I was pregnant. We were scared. But if Lily ever grows up thinking her father walked away because he was guilty, let this tell her the truth. He walked away because he loved us more than his name. Ethan closed his eyes. Lily's lips trembled. Across the bay, Claire Whitmore lowered her head, and the weight of her company's polished history finally bent her shoulders. The luxury cars beyond the glass still shone under perfect lights, but no one was looking at them anymore. They were all looking at the man they had thrown out, and the little girl who had just heard her mother give him back his honor. Claire did not speak for a long moment after Grace's recording ended. The service bay lights hummed above them, bright and unforgiving, turning every face pale and every polished surface honest. Beyond the glass wall, the showroom had stopped pretending nothing was happening. Customers stood still beside cars worth more than houses in some towns. Salespeople gathered in small clusters, whispering less with curiosity now and more with shame. Ethan Walker remained beside Lily, one hand resting gently on her shoulder, his eyes lowered as if the truth had not just cleared his name, but reopened a wound he had spent years learning how to carry quietly. Claire finally turned toward Mason. Make 3 copies of the full data set, she said. 1 for independent forensic review, 1 for Whitmore Legal, and 1 for Mr. Walker. Blake stepped forward, his voice tighter than before. That is confidential company property. Claire looked at him slowly. No, Blake. It is evidence. The words settled into the room like a locked door opening. Mason moved fast, but his hands shook slightly as he connected a secure drive. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 31%, 42%, 58. Blake watched it as though each number were pulling the floor from under him. My father handled investment restructuring, he said. He did not run engineering. He did not write accident reports. Ethan looked up at him. Maybe not. Blake blinked, surprised by the softness in Ethan's voice. Then you understand. I understand that sons inherit more than money, Ethan said. Sometimes they inherit silence. Sometimes they decide whether to keep it. Blake looked away. That was the first honest thing he had done all day. Claire folded her arms, not in anger, but to steady herself. Mason, pull the amended report. Mason swallowed. From the public archive? From the restricted archive. Yes, ma'am. The keys clicked. The printer nearby woke with a soft mechanical whir. Page after page slid into the tray, warm, white, official. Claire picked up the first sheet and read the language her company had repeated for a decade. Operator error. Failure to respond. Engineer negligence. Her hands tightened around the paper. Those phrases had lived in annual summaries, investor briefings, and training modules. They had protected the brand. They had buried a man. This stops today, Claire said. Blake shook his head. You cannot undo 10 years in one afternoon. Claire turned to him. Watch me. Then she walked out of the service bay and into the showroom. No announcement had been prepared. No public relations team stood beside her. No legal counsel whispered safe words into her ear. Just Claire Whitmore, rain still darkening one shoulder of her coat, carrying a report that suddenly felt heavier than all the cars around her. Ethan stayed back with Lily, but the glass wall could not hide the room from them. Claire stood near the center display, beneath a suspended silver emblem of Whitmore Motors. Everyone, may I have your attention? She said. She did not need to raise her voice. Guilt had already quieted the room. Blake stopped near the service doors, unable to follow, unable to leave. Claire looked at the customers first, then her employees. A few minutes ago, a man and his daughter were treated in this showroom without dignity. They were judged by clothing, by appearance, by assumptions, and by a version of our brand that I want no part of. A few salespeople lowered their eyes. Mason stood behind the glass with his jaw tight. Claire lifted the report. That man is Ethan Walker. 10 years ago, he helped build the original Aurora system that made this company what it is today. Evidence now shows that he was blamed for a failure he did not cause. A soft gasp moved through the showroom. Blake's face drained completely. Claire continued, her voice steadier now. Effective immediately, Whitmore Motors is reopening the Desert Ridge investigation. Mr. Walker will receive a formal public apology, restoration of technical credit, and independent legal review of all damages caused by the false report. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, not because he needed applause, because somewhere, Grace had finally been heard. Lily looked up at him. Daddy, does this mean they know you are good? Ethan knelt beside her. The people who matter already did. Claire turned toward the glass, toward Ethan and Lily, and her expression softened in front of everyone. Then she faced the showroom again. Luxury without respect is just expensive emptiness, she said. And from this day forward, no one who walks through these doors will be treated as small because someone else wants to feel tall. The room fell silent. Not embarrassed silence. Not confused silence. The kind of silence that comes when people are not watching a scandal unfold, but a wrong begin to be repaired. The silence held for several seconds before anyone dared to move. Then, from the back of the showroom, an older customer in a gray sport coat set down his coffee cup and began to clap. It was not loud at first, just two hands meeting with careful respect. Then another person joined. Then Mason Reed stepped out from behind the service glass and clapped too, not because applause could fix anything, but because sometimes the room needs to admit what it has witnessed. One by one, the sound spread beneath the bright ceiling lights until it reached Ethan and Lily in the service bay. Ethan did not step forward to receive it. He did not lift his chin like a man finally proven better than those who had mocked him. He simply held his daughter close while the applause washed past him like rainwater moving along a curb. Blake Harrington stood alone near the service doors, his face stiff, his phone hanging uselessly at his side. Claire turned toward him. Blake, you are suspended effective immediately pending a full conduct review and an independent review of all connections between Harrington Capital Holdings and the Desert Ridge Report. Blake's mouth opened. Claire, my family helped save this company. She walked toward him slowly. Maybe they helped finance it. That is not the same as saving it. He looked around the showroom, searching for support in the same faces that had laughed earlier. No one offered him any. Pride is loud when it has an audience. Without one, it often does not know how to stand. You are making a mistake, Blake said, but his voice had lost its polish. Claire stopped inches from him, calm as winter glass. The mistake was made 10 years ago. Today we begin correcting it. Security did not grab him. No one shouted. No one made a spectacle. Claire simply nodded toward the exit, and Blake walked out under the same glass doors where Ethan and Lily had been humiliated only minutes before. The difference was that Blake left carrying the silence he had created. When the doors closed behind him, Claire turned back to Ethan. The applause had faded. Now there was only the hum of lights, the faint clicking of cooling engines, and the soft rain against the windows. She crossed into the service bay and stopped a respectful distance away. "Mr. Walker," she said, "I owe you more than a public statement." Ethan shook his head once. "You do not owe me a performance." Claire accepted that, and the humility of it made her voice softer. "Then let me start with something real." She lowered herself to one knee in front of Lily, not as a chief executive officer, not as the owner of the building, but as a woman speaking to a child who had been made to feel small. "Lily, what happened to you today was wrong. Your father did not walk into this place poor. He walked in carrying history, love, and the truth. And I am sorry we failed to see that." Lily looked at her father first. Ethan gave the smallest nod. Only then did Lily answer. "My daddy fixes things." Claire smiled, but her eyes shone. "I can see that." Lily glanced toward the old Aurora. "Can you fix Mommy's car?" The question was so innocent that it reached everyone who heard it. Claire stood slowly and looked at Ethan. For once, the solution was not a lawsuit, a headline, or a corporate speech. It was a part on a shelf, a promise kept, and a child who wanted one more piece of her mother to survive. "Mason," Claire said, "find the original central control module inventory." Mason was already moving. "Yes, ma'am." Ethan stepped forward. "I can pay for it." Claire looked back at him. "I know you can." That answer mattered. She did not say it like charity. She said it like respect. But today, Whitmore Motors is paying a debt it should have paid years ago. Mason returned with a sealed archive box, dust still clinging to its edges. Inside lay the part Ethan had come for, wrapped in old factory paper. He stared at it for a long moment. Not because it was rare, because Grace had been right. The truth had found its way home. Claire placed the box in his hands. "The Aurora launch is tomorrow night," she said. "I would like you and Lily to be there. Not as guests we pity, as family we forgot." Ethan looked at Lily, then at the car, then at the woman trying to rebuild a broken legacy without hiding the cracks. "I will come," he said quietly, "but not for the cameras." Claire nodded. "Then come for Grace." The service bay fell still again, but this time the silence did not hurt. It felt like Grace entering a room that had finally made space for it. The next evening, the Whitmore Motors launch hall glowed under 1,000 soft white lights. Cameras lined the rear platform. Investors filled the first rows in dark suits and careful smiles. Beyond the glass walls, downtown Los Angeles shimmered with evening traffic, red and gold lights moving like quiet rivers through the city. At the center of the stage sat the new Aurora, silver, elegant, perfect beneath the spotlight. But near the side entrance, away from the photographers, Ethan Walker stood with Lily's hand in his. He wore a clean white shirt, dark jeans, and the same faded jacket Grace had once said made him look like a man who could survive any storm. Lily wore a blue dress and held her mother's photograph in both hands. "Daddy," she whispered, "would Mommy like all these lights?" Ethan looked toward the stage, then down at her. She would say they are too bright. Lily smiled faintly. Then she would ask if the engine runs right. For the first time in a long while, Ethan laughed softly. Not much, just enough to let the old sadness breathe. Across the hall, Claire Whitmore stood behind the curtain, holding the speech her team had prepared. It was polished, safe, full of market language and future projections. She read the first line twice, then folded the pages in half. Some truths cannot be spoken from a script. When Claire walked onto the stage, the room applauded with the confidence of people expecting a celebration. She stood at the podium, waited for the sound to fade, then looked past the cameras to Ethan and Lily. "Tonight was supposed to be about a car," she began. "A new model, a new platform, a new chapter for Whitmore Motors." She paused. The hall settled. "But yesterday, I learned that a company can build beautiful machines and still forget the people who gave them a soul." A ripple moved through the audience. Claire stepped away from the podium. Behind her, the screen changed. Not to sales numbers. Not to glossy footage. It showed a photograph of the original Aurora prototype, parked under a desert sky, with Grace Walker smiling beside it, and Ethan standing half out of frame, one hand on the open hood. Lily's breath caught. Ethan looked down, overcome not by shame now, but by the mercy of being seen correctly at last. Claire continued, her voice steady, but warm. 10 years ago, Ethan Walker helped create the heart of the Aurora system. He was blamed for a failure he did not cause. His wife, Grace Walker, protected the truth when this company failed to protect him. Last night, that truth came home. The room was silent now. Even the cameras seemed quieter. Claire turned toward Ethan. Mr. Walker, on behalf of Whitmore Motors, and on behalf of my family, I am sorry. No one applauded at first. They understood this was not the kind of apology that needed noise. Ethan walked slowly to the stage with Lily beside him. He did not look triumphant. He looked like a father carrying his daughter through the last few steps of a long, painful road. Claire handed him a small polished plaque, but Ethan barely looked at it. His eyes stayed on Grace's photograph. I did not come back for credit, he said into the microphone, his voice low but clear. I came for a part. I came because I promised my daughter her mother's car would keep running. He looked out at the room. But maybe dignity works that way too. You keep it running, even when no one else sees the miles. This time, the applause rose slowly, then completely. People stood. Investors, engineers, employees, even the technicians along the wall. Lily wrapped both arms around her father's waist. Claire stepped back, letting the moment belong where it should have belonged all along. Outside the glass, under the evening sky, the old Aurora waited beside the curb, repaired and softly humming. No longer a hidden witness to pain, but a living reminder that truth may be delayed, respect may be denied, and good people may be misunderstood, but quiet dignity does not disappear. It waits. It endures. And when Grace finally opens the door, the whole room knows. If this story touched your heart, share in the comments what you believe matters more in a person, what they own, or what they carry quietly inside. And if you have ever seen someone treated as small, only to later learn they were stronger than anyone knew, leave a few words for them below. Thank you for watching until the end of this video.